So I think we can start. Good afternoon and welcome to this to all participants in the room and also to all people joining online to this hybrid policy dialogue, a future-proof electricity grid, the backbone for clean energy and REPowerEU, organized by the European Policy Center with the support of the European Investment Bank. So my name is Simon Dekeyrel and I'm a policy analyst at the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program, and I will be moderating today's event on grid development in the EU. So grids are the backbone of our economy and society, delivering power to our homes, businesses, and industry. As the EU's clean energy transition picks up speed, in the pursuit of the objectives of the Green Deal, the importance of the grids is only set to increase further. First of all, the rapid uptake of clean technologies such as electric cars and heat pumps are electrifying parts of the economy that were previously, of the energy system that were previously dominated by fossil fuels, which in turn is increasing the demands on the EU's electricity networks. At the same time, member states are accelerating the rollout of renewable energy sources, which requires the construction of new power lines, and also updates to existing grids, including the digitalization and the enabling of flexibility through demand response and energy storage to compensate for the intermittency of variable renewables such as wind and solar power, and to ensure reliable supplies for end consumers. So in short, the European electricity grid must become smarter, more interconnected, resilient, and flexible to cope both with the rollout of clean technologies such as electric cars and heat pumps, and also to ensure to ensure the cost-effective integration of renewables into the electricity systems. Urgent investment is required, or grids risk becoming a major bottleneck for the EU's clean energy transition, slowing down the phase out of fossil fuels and in turn also undermining the objectives of the Green Deal. A recent report published by the IEA last month, for instance, showed that 3,000 gigawatts of renewable power projects is currently waiting in grid connection queues, which is the equivalent of 5 times the amount of solar PV and wind power capacity that was added in 2022 globally. So if nothing is done, this problem will only become more acute. At the same time, it will be important to ensure that grid development does not come at the expense of other EU objectives such as nature and biodiversity protection, and also does not undermine public support for the clean energy transition. In light of the European Commission's upcoming action plan, the aim of this event is to reflect on these challenges for the European grid development, and also to identify key areas for action in EU policy. So joining us for today's discussion are Isidoro Tapia, Senior Energy Economist at the Climate Office of the European Investment Bank, Olivier Grabette, Senior Executive Vice President at RTE, Louise Rullaud, Head of the Distribution and Market Facilitation Team at Eurelectric, Joni Karjalainen, Energy Transition Analyst at Climate Action Network Europe. Then also joining us online, Vilislava Ivanova, Research Manager at E3G's Clean Economy Program. After the introductory remarks by the speakers, the floor will be open for questions from the audience. To online participants, I would encourage you to already pose any questions you might have during the introductory remarks by the speakers in the Q&A chat on Zoom, which we then can pick up during the Q&A session. I should also mention that since it is a hybrid policy dialogue, that this event will be recorded. So then I'm happy to hand over to the first speaker, Isidoro Tapia from the European Investment Bank, for his opening statements.
Thank you very much, and thank you to EPC for the kind invitation to participate today. I have prepared a few slides. I will go quickly through them to present what we are doing at the EIB to finance electricity networks, to support the rollout of and the maintenance and the investments that are needed in the electricity networks, and also to briefly summarize where we see the opportunities going forward. EIB, the EU Climate Bank, probably you know as well, but just let me say a few words. We always say that we are not policymakers, we are policy takers. We follow the policy priorities of the EU. The EU bank is owned by the EU member states, and since 2020, the European Investment Bank became the EU Climate Bank with an ambitious strategy, the Climate Bank Roadmap 2021-2025, setting in particular three targets to align all our financing activities with the Paris Agreement since the end of 2020, to increase the share of our investments, of our financing that is dedicated to climate action and sustainable environmental projects to more than 50% by 2025, and to support 1 trillion of green finance in the present decade. I have to say that all three targets are either already met or on track to be met. In particular, we are fully aligned with the principles of the Paris Agreement since 2020. We stopped financing all non-abating fossil fuel projects. We have increased our share of climate action and environmental sustainability projects already to 58%, so ahead of schedule. And we are on track to support 1 trillion, having supported more than 220 billion by the end of 2022. Together with the Climate Bank Roadmap, the bank adopted its energy lending policy, defining a number of priorities in the coming years. As I said, we stopped supporting traditional fossil fuels. We established as a priority unlocking energy efficiency, mainstreaming energy efficiency investments. We also supported the decarbonization of the energy supply, and in particular also the securing and enabling the infrastructure through electricity transmission and distribution networks. As you can see here, the results of these policy priorities have already translated into very concrete results. In the past few years, we have largely increased our support to energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electricity grids. In particular, in the case of electricity grids, last year we financed 5.6 billion euros of projects related to electricity networks, which was the record, the historical record, with a very significant increase as compared to the previous years. Having said that, if we look at the last 10 years, in average, we have been financed around 3.5 billion euros every year of electricity networks projects. Which corresponds basically to around 30% of our EIB lending to the total energy sector. We support the transition of the energy sector throughout the whole value chain, from manufacturing to the deployment of new technologies, and in particular in the case of the electricity markets in the electricity sector, we support both generation, transmission, distribution, and projects at the consumer level, such as solar PV or prosumers projects. The main type of investments that we are financing in the EU, of course, they are related to the integration of renewable energy resources, given the very high ambitious targets of member states, both offshore and onshore. In the case of networks, we are also financing an increasing number of projects related to the adaptation of the networks, taking into account the new climatic conditions, and in particular higher temperatures or other types of risk, such as drains, flooding, etc. We are also supporting the reinforcement of the system, both internal and cross-border, and also the improvement of the operational performance of the grids. There are a number of challenges that we are seeing, and in particular, let me start by mentioning the higher interest rate environment. We come from a long period of very low interest rates, and this affects all capital-intensive projects. The electricity grids is only one example of them. But of course, and maybe this is something that we can further discuss later, we are already seeing an impact in some projects. Higher interest rates might have an impact not only on the profitability of the projects, but also in some cases may result in some postponement of the capex, or may result in a discussion between the regulators and the DSOs about the correct setting of the tariffs. E&S, environmental and social acceptability, in particular of overhead infrastructures, long permitting times, an increased use of lower impact but high budget alternatives, such as underground or subsea routes. It's something that we already seen in practice. And of course, the procurement of the line of the works is another of the challenge that we are seeing in practice. There are a number of financial tools at the EU level. I won't go through all of them. Probably they are all familiar to you. But let me just say that there are a number of grant facilities available, in particular for projects with multinational scope. There are a number of tools through the Modernization Fund, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the Connecting Europe Facility, and also InvestEU that TSOs and DSOs may benefit from. And in the case of a financial instrument, there is a partial coverage by the EU budget of the EIB loans or the equity investments into the projects. Lending in electricity distribution, we are discussing with many DSOs their investment needs over a period of 3 to 4 years. Again, some of the type of investments that we are financing is the reinforcement to meet a growing demand, to replace aging assets, to adapt to new climatic conditions, the installation of smart meters, and also to improve the climate resilience of the grids. We are also financing the operations outside of the EU. There are a number of examples that are included in the slides. I will only briefly mention them. Let me just say that the challenges typically outside of the EU are different. We are seeing weaker promoters. In some cases, we need to spend more resources on the monitoring of the projects, and also the long lead times for project completion is typically a concern for this type of projects. EIB support to REPowerEU as a result of the invasion of Ukraine and the situation of the energy markets, that the subsequent situation of the energy markets, the EU adopted the REPowerEU package, and the EIB adopted its contribution to REPowerEU with an additional funding of 45 billion for projects aligned with REPowerEU, on top of what we have been financing, which will be deployed by 2027 and is expected to mobilize around 150 billion in new projects, in new investment for the targeted sectors. Among these target sectors, of course, it's electricity grids, since the Commission has estimated an increased investment needs as a result of the situation of the energy markets. At the same time, the EIB has decided to broaden the scope of the eligible sector to boost financing for EU manufacturing technologies, and this also includes components of electricity grids as something that we can support the manufacturing of these components. And just to finalize, and as a summary, our toolkit to support electricity grids is quite broad. We offer a wide range of products from corporate and project finance loans to the participation in hybrid, in green bonds, as well as more recently on sustainability-linked loans. We also provide not only financial support, but we provide advisory services to help in the preparation and implementation of the projects through our advisory services departments. We require, of course, that the projects are financially sound, but also economically sound, and that they comply with high technical, environmental, and social standards. And there are a number of examples that can be given. I have included in the slides some of the most financially innovative projects in the past few years, such as the participation of the EIB in the green hybrid bond issuance by Réseau Corporación in Spain and Tauron and Energia in Poland, contributing to the deployment of the investment plans of the TSOs and the DSOs of these countries. And yeah, happy to take any questions and to participate later in the debate. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Isidoro, for this overview of all the European Investment Bank's activities in grid development in the EU. I think quite certainly a very spectacular increase in EIB lending to grids over the past 4 years. And indeed, also happy to pick up on your points on higher interest rates during the discussion, and maybe also interesting to hear from our next speaker, Olivier Grabette, Senior Executive Vice President at RTE, how this is affecting their business. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and inviting us just to illustrate a little bit what does it mean for a transmission grid. So I will take the example of the French transmission grid, but all the dynamic is quite the same in all the countries in Europe. Just to give an idea about what is the change we have to face for the coming years. We published 1 month ago a report, prospective report, just to see what we do need to change in the electricity system, French electricity system from now to 2035, just to be online with the 2050 objectives. Considering, for example, domestic heating, we will have to install more than 10 million new heating pumps. We will have to renovate more than 380,000 houses or flats every year to improve the thermal performance. Regarding the share of the electricity for the heating of all the business premises, so now it is 29% of the demand. It will reach to 54%. For the transport sector, so up to now we have more or less 1% of electrical car. We expect to have 45 in 2035. For the truck, it's quite zero today. It's expected to be more or less 23% in 2035. And for the industry, we have 2 factors. The first is the decarbonization of the industry, and also the wish to reindustrialize the country and to transfer some factories that has been exported, and especially on the East Asia, to come back in Europe and especially in France. And so now the share of the direct and indirect share of the electricity in the industry for the energy consumption is 29%, and we expect this to be more or less 50% in 2035. So to be able to serve this new demand and this huge change, we need to lever everything we have in hand. So first, but it's not the topics for today, is energy efficiency and energy temperance. We have to also consider that to not only to lever the energy efficiency, but also to question the use of energy in order to also be able to lever the behavior of the consumer, just to try to reduce the consumption. But also we need also to develop new energy capacity, new generation capacity. Just to give the example for France, and we are likely, today, we have a decarbonized mix thanks to the nuclear, but even in France, with the present situation is quite a little bit favorable in terms of CO2 emission for the generation side, we will need to develop a huge capacity of renewables. For solar, we expect to develop between 4 to 7 gigawatts per year from now to 2035. For the onshore wind, we have to develop more 20 gigawatts of new capacities from now to 2035. And for offshore grids, it's for wind farm, it's quite the same. It's 18 gigawatts of new capacity to be developed. So it won't be possible to have this new energy mix without strong development of the grid. And at the same time, a part of the grid is a little bit aged. A part of the grid has been developed after the Second World War. And now, at the same time, we have to face two big challenges: to develop the grid, to welcome and to connect the new generation capacity, to be able to serve the load and the consumption increase. Just to give an example, in a very, very short area in the north of France, the Dunkirk area, which is close to the sea, thanks to the decarbonization of some big industry, the request from the industrials is to develop new 3 gigawatts of power, new power in less than 5 years. Just to give an idea, to serve this, we need to build 3 high voltage 400 kV lines. Well, more or less, it's 1 gigawatt per 400 kV lines. So it's quite a challenge to be able to serve this type of demand in a very short delay. And at the same time, we will have to renew the grid. So as it has been said, and as you said through the IEA reports, we will need to have very huge investment in the transmission grid in all the European countries. Just to illustrate this, in France, 10 years ago, we used to have 1 billion euros per year of investment in the grid. Now, in 2023, it's 2 billion for RT. What we expect for the coming years is to reach 4 to 5 billion euros a year of investment. And the reason, we'll have to keep it up to 2050. It's not a peak, it's a ramp. And after a ramp, it's another ramp to be expected. So to do that, we will need also to mobilize all the energy. We spend a lot of talk and energy at the European level to define new objectives. Now it's time to walk the talk and just to make the things. And so what we do need to succeed in that is first to have a stable and predictable regulatory framework, just to be able to secure the investment, to find the partners, and it's very important to have something which is more stable. And according to us, it's not the time now to rediscuss what could be the objective for 2040 or so. We have to now mobilize just to reach the objective we fixed for 2030 and 35. We also have to face the acceptability, because all those new infrastructures will need also to develop this with the acceptance of the people of the neighborhood. And it's a big challenge. And so it's very important also to keep a very efficient permitting process just to be on time, because now what is very important is the timeline, and we don't have 20 years to develop that. On the other side, we need to have all the resources to do. And there are three types of resources. First, and you spoke about that, financial resources. We'll need to finance and all those investments in the context that is not so favorable, because, as you said, with higher interest rates, so capital is more costly. And so it's a little bit of a problem as well. And so it's why we'll have to mobilize all the tools that are available at the European level in order to follow those needs of investment. The second need is to have all the industrial capacity to provide all the equipment that we do need for this. And we are not alone. It's quite the same in all the continents. And there is a worldwide competition. So to get the component that we do need for those investments. So it's very important for Europe to mobilize and just also to have an industry that is able to provide all the components that we do need for that. And especially considering the natural resources that, and we need a lot of copper, iron, and all of type of resources. And so it's why also we are fully committed to develop circularity. In order, as I said, we have a part of the grid that is old, and we have to renew this part of the grid. And so what we would like, and we launched an alliance between different TSOs, European TSOs, 18 months ago with Réseau, Tenet, Elia, Amprion, and Swiss Grid, APG, and several TSOs, just to see how together we can accelerate also this circularity, and in order to collect all the resources that we can get from the renewal of the grid, just to be able to serve a part of the need that we do need for the new development. And also, and it's a big issue, we need all the human resources also to do that at each level. Engineers, project managers, the purchase department will need also people on field able to build this new. And it's clearly a big challenge. At that time, we are not sure that we will be able to have all of this, even if we have the money to finance those investments. It's not at that stage sure that we will have all the resources, and especially the human resource to be able to make those investments. And without those investments in the grid, and I can assume that you can have more or less the same picture for all the type of grid, we won't be able to reach the objective of decarbonization. So it's now time to mobilize all the energy in Europe to face those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for giving us a perspective on the challenges for grid development in France, which I assume will also be the same in many other member states, or all other member states in the EU. And a very good point also on the acceptability of electricity grid development, on the importance of acceptability for grid development and renewable energy expansion in the EU, which I think will only become more important as the clean energy transition accelerates. And also happy to hear that during the Q&A more of your ideas on how we can create a stable regulatory framework for investment in the grid in the EU. And then to our next speaker, Louise Rullaud from Eurelectric.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the European Policy Center, but also EIB for the invitation. I think it's a really timely discussions. I think everyone expecting 2 weeks from now to read the EU action plans from the European Commission on grids. I'm really pleased to see also some spotlight now on grids. I think the title of this conference is, we say that the grid is the backbone of the energy transition. And I think it's very much needed. I'm just going to pick the, yeah, thank you very much. So Olivier focused on TSOs, so I will focus on DSOs, so the distribution level. I think there's an increasing awareness that we need to really look at the grid and also to the distribution grids. We have spent a lot of time the past years to define targets with the Fit for 55 and also REPowerEU. Very much needed targets to decarbonize our society. We see that we will have to double the numbers of new connections to the grid in some jurisdictions. And why? Because we will see the triple of numbers of heat pump. We need to multiply it per 4 numbers of solar PV and per 7 charging stations if we want to meet the REPowerEU ambition. So it's really a massive challenge ahead for distribution grids in terms of volume, but also time. It's a race against time. And if the entire system is growing, we also need to have the grid growing too. And this has a cost. And today, the European Union is investing 23 billion per year in grids. And it's way below compared to our own estimation, where we think, and as I think Olivier also mentioned the point, it's going to just increase. It's going to be an exponential increase. We see by 2030 that we need per year 36 billion per year in Europe to make the distribution grid fit for the energy transition. And after there will be an acceleration. We will go roughly in average 65 million per year. And what this 65 billion cover, it's 3 types of costs. The first is hardware infrastructure. We will need to build new capacity, but also to replace existing infrastructure, which is because the grid is aging. It's about line, cables, substation, transformers. Then there will be a second type of cost, which is digitalization. We need to optimize existing grids, and to do so, we need to invest in innovative solutions and digitalized solutions. And the third type of cost is workforce. And we have estimated at Eurelectric that for the distribution grid by 2030, we will need 500,000 of new jobs to be created. We are in a race against time, as I said, and the problem that we are facing, maybe it's even more dramatic for transmission level, is that it takes time to build new grids. So if we look at the transmission level, it's sometimes even like a decade. We go between 7 to 10 years, for instance, to subsea cables. But if we look at the distribution lines, so the low voltage line, the one that connect the end customer, it's 1 year. 1 year is not acceptable politically, and for the society, it's not acceptable to wait for a year to get your solar PV connected to your roof. So we have to improve the way we work with local authority with regards permitting, because most of the time is due to the permitting. That's why it takes so much time. So we need to build new capacity for sure to integrate all these new renewables, new loads, but at the same time, we also need to optimize the existing grid, especially because it takes time to build new grids. So for sure, to optimize, we need we need to improve the grid management. And here, we will need to have an advanced digitalization, but also efficient data management. So we have identified, and I think, Simon, it was a bit the part of the briefing we got to identify the priorities for the action plan. So these are our 4 key priorities. The first one is more for regarding the regulatory framework, like the incentive, making sure that we have a sort of forward-looking mindset for grid planning and investment. The second one is related more to EU funding for grid projects. Third one is the stakeholder engagement, notably the public acceptance. And the last one, but not least, and I would focus more on sustainability and especially resilience, because resilience is often the forgotten element and the missing piece. We talk a lot about climate mitigation, but not that much about climate adaptation, especially for the infrastructure. So if we look at the 4th priority, and I will go very fast because I think we will discuss them more in details after, but we must reset somehow a bit the regulatory mandate for more forward-looking planning and investment. The regulators in many countries are more focusing on keeping the costs really like under control, which is their mission. But the problem is that on the other hand, the grid operators are being requested to deliver and to build new grids. And if we have to wait to get the connection requests, then we will completely miss the targets that we have set. So we need to allow the system operators to build grid on forecasts, and to maybe there will be a need to discuss the risk and also the responsibilities, whether we come up to a situation where the grid is under-optimized, but this is clearly a needed debate. We also need to have a more long-term perspective with regards to network planning, especially at distribution level. It's like 5 to 10 years. And one tool could be the NECP, the National Energy Climate Plans, maybe to create more reciprocity between the NECP, where we could add a dimension, including the infrastructure, and making sure that the grid planning for the DSOs includes as well the objectives set in the NECP. We also must ease EU fundings for DSO projects. I was really interested to see that from EIB that indeed there are a lot of money available for distribution grids, but I think it's a matter of easing the access, because probably the largest DSOs are indeed benefiting from loans and grants from EU, but we have 2,500 DSOs, and the smallest DSOs are not necessarily aware that this exists. So we need somehow to simplify the access and to give clear also information and directive at member state level when there's a sort of new initiative and that there's this, that the grid could benefit and should be somehow included in the envelope. And we are also discussing the possibility, why not in the next multi-annual financial framework, to create a dedicated program for decentralized projects, especially because in the current CEF for energy, we don't see so much the benefit for DSO projects. In the PCI list, so far there is no grid project that are eligible to PCI. So the third point is about simplifying grid permitting. And I think we had already some improvements in the Renewable Energy Directive. But I think if we try to be a bit more ambitious, we could consider why not positive silence mechanism, a one-stop shop, especially for high voltage projects, and also some national rule book, especially when you have, like in Germany, 900 DSOs. I think we need somehow to harmonize practices at national level. But also we need to provide clear access to grid data, especially for instance, RES developer or for instance, charge point operators. They need to know where they can best get their infrastructure connected to the grid. So to do that, you need to communicate. And there are some different ways to do that. You can promote grid capacity maps. You can also better involve and publish your network development plans. The last point is about resilience, digitalization, and sustainability. And I will really focus on the first point, because for me, it's really, as I said, the one that we are not talking enough. In France, there were like recently storms, and the DSOs are actually still now trying to fix all the outage. And this is really, I think, a problem of not considering enough adaptation measures overall in the strategy. And I think one way, one simple way could be better cooperate between DSOs and TSOs, but also between DSOs among different countries. I know that, for instance, in that case, we got the support from Irish DSOs, which was extremely helpful for restoring the situation in France. Yeah, and I think the sustainability aspect has been covered by Olivier. So these are a bit my 4 points for discussions later in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the concrete recommendations that you made, and also a good point on the resilience and climate adaptation, which I think Isidoro already mentioned before. So, and then, yeah, to our last in-person speaker, I would hand over to Joni from Climate Action Network Europe.
Thank you so much. And thank you for EPC and EIB for inviting us to this event. I think great interventions so far, and especially looking at the different aspects of and pieces of the puzzle. From the civil society perspective, we of course hope to understand better this topic and electricity infrastructures in a wider picture, also with regards to climate ambition overall, how they fit into infrastructural change. And also maybe perhaps looking at electricity infrastructures in a wider context, economically, socially, environmentally. So just thinking of the topic of today, when we say future-proof, we are thinking of certainly looking at electricity infrastructures and the necessity to upgrade and also expand. But will they be future-proof overall, and will they be so evenly across Europe? Maybe that's something to think about in more detail from a European and pan-European perspective. Backbone was mentioned in the title of the event, so we are speaking a lot about technology, but certainly the human aspects that were mentioned will be central to achieving these goals, as already the issue of human resources was mentioned. So really to set the scene more from the policy perspective, obviously a starting point is the EU climate and energy policy architecture. And however, even with this level of ambition we have currently, we are struggling to keep at plus 1.5. We already know that this is the case. At the same time, by 2030, we have the new renewable energy targets, which are aiming at the share of 42.5% of renewables in the energy mix and aiming for 45%. So the more this is advanced, given that we would have 7 years to achieve this, the more we are in a hurry and the more the pressures on the grid side will be heightened. So I think it really needs this issue of forward-looking planning to be taken seriously, looking at these goals. And secondly, from the point of view of civil society, the issue of renewables-based electrification, taking it seriously, the fact that more and more electricity will flow, both through the transmission and distribution networks, and also pointing to electrification with renewables in transport, heating, and industry. So I think this is also connected to how we design and think about distribution and transmission grids, and also interconnections in a broader perspective. And can I say that I'm actually really happy that so far in this event, we have been very clear on speaking of these different aspects, not only speaking about grids as a headline topic, but differentiating all these three levels from one another. So the level of ambition is something to really think about. In CanEurope, we also do some of our own modeling-based scenario work with so-called Paris Agreement compatible scenarios. And according to our calculations, by 2040, we need to triple the rate of renewables deployment per year compared to the present rate, while having energy demand from the present. So the issue of demand, energy savings, yeah, those are kind of starting points to the discussion. There was already some references to the Grids Action Plan to be released at the EU level and by the EC. Also, we are interested in seeing what aspects and pieces of the puzzle it will solve. We have heard some hints on it addressing some barriers, potentially mostly regulatory, financial, permitting issues perhaps, and better, smarter use of existing grids. We can certainly imagine these types of changes, but perhaps something we haven't yet discussed so far in detail is to how to take into account the differences in the institutional landscape at different member states when we think of their energy sectors. So to have it really as to have a European-wide impact, we have to think more also from the member state perspective. And of course, we can imagine that the attention on grids will address some of the issues we need to tackle. But there are also related issues in other really important policy files, such as reforms on electricity market design, as an example of what is not only the infrastructure, but what are the rules that we have around us. So to look at these issues more in detail will be super important. I think the issue of time has already been mentioned from different perspectives, so perhaps not to dwell on too much around that. But maybe in terms of thinking about grids with a view from being in 2040 or 2050 and how will that look like? Some countries are certainly struggling to assume the more distributed mindset to the whole energy system planning and design. So what will it mean if we don't have the base load as we have today? Or if there is a base load, perhaps we'll have a base load of fully variable renewables with electrolyzers. So that it will certainly look a very different types of an infrastructure and impose very different types of infrastructure requirements overall. So these types of issues are something to think about perhaps in the wider picture of frame. And here the investment in these larger infrastructures becomes crucial given their economic lifetime. So the forward-looking planning and implementation needs to be happening already with an outlook of how we imagine the infrastructures to be in not only 2030, but also in a different type of Europe in 2040 and 2050. And faster permitting alone for grids will be, for instance, part of the puzzle, but alone certainly not enough. On some of the related issues, some of the points we probably do think we need to talk about more. Already mentioning the issue of energy savings, also this shift in focus that already was raised to the distribution level. Having a more decentralized perspective overall will be very, very helpful. And the issue of an attention shift also from the social and environmental perspectives for civil society will probably be something very valuable, because the more we put an emphasis on the distribution level, the less pressures we probably will have on the transmission side. So I think it will also have lots of value from many different perspectives, not only economically, but also socially and environmentally. So I think there is a big interest, both from the point of view from technological innovation, but also a social interest in what might seem like technical issues on sector coupling or energy system integrations or more circular aspects. So very good reasons why to push that even more. So to be real, a bit on the planning issues, and maybe also to set some of the expectations that can Europe and the civil society is currently discussing with a view to the grids action plan and related infrastructures. We think it's really important to be explicit of the goal to expedite, that the grids action plan will help expedite 100% renewable energy system, so renewables-based electrification. Secondly, to really utilize the full potential of energy savings. So the demand side of things, it's about this shift in attention to the distribution side that has already come out from multiple perspectives. It's not only about the consumers, us as citizens, it's also about how the system is designed to help those more distribution level interactions. Then thirdly, the enabling technologies and paying more attention to that. And fourthly, the social and environmental safeguards. This is especially looking at the transmission level and interconnection sides. Something to think about: how does this type of more distributed energy planning and distributed energy resources, how do they combine, for instance, with when it comes to offshore, with maritime spatial planning, energy planning? So it's actually about the governance of different types of planning regimes. And we hope that that will receive also more attention in the future as we push along the agenda of grids. So just to conclude, we think grids are a very important part of the jigsaw, kind of pieces of the puzzle, but it's much more not only about the technology and the finance, it's much also about the how and the focus. So let me stop here. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And I think a very good point on the need for a more distribution-focused perspective on grid development and how that can interact with the social and environmental repercussions of the clean energy transition. And then to our final speaker joining us online is Vilislava Ivanova from E3G.
Hi, thanks everyone. And I have the kind of perk and also difficulty of going last and trying to not repeat everything people said already. So from our perspective, the topic, there are 4 core topics that we tend to talk about when we talk about grids, and they were mostly mentioned, so I'll try and focus on one. So the first one is around the building new infrastructure, which was discussed at length. And I know there are discussions at the moment how we can speed permitting, how we can speed planning. There is also the always wider debate around cost sharing, but also how do we engage customers early on in the process so that they get a say on the important questions around where infrastructure goes and how it impacts them. The second one we heard about was around manufacturing. So I've heard over conversations the last couple of weeks, a lot of talk about what can we do around standardizing the way we procure equipment, for example, so that we can kind of be faster in the way we build some of the materials we need. There is also the whole conversation around needs and being clear on what's needed for the infrastructure and how do we make that in the kind of global context of more and more competition. The third one is around skills, and I hear the topic around skill shortages a lot from all the sectors, and we are in the European Year of Skills. So we have, for example, skills initiatives in construction, they exist in renewables. Perhaps there is a need for a skills initiative specifically on grids and kind of how do we make sure we get enough labor force, but also with the right skills in the sector. And the final one, which was mentioned as well, was about digitalization. And I think there is an element of this whole conversation which we need to talk about more, and it's about the business models that transmission and distribution system operators would have in future. So picking up on Joni's points around distribution level and making sure we integrate all of the new technologies we have, storage, distributed EVs, heat pumps, and how do we ensure that we make most effective use of existing infrastructure alongside building the new infrastructure we need, because with a lot of the technologies we have nowadays are being deployed to distribution grids almost faster than we can build the grids, and so we need to make sure that we can make best use of what we have. And so in terms of 2 topics perhaps to flag a bit more, planning was mentioned already. We know we need to be better at planning. There is a lot of conversation around anticipatory investment. I think for me that raises the question around what are we planning for? Are we planning for alignment with climate targets? Is it 2030, 2035? And so there is a need also to think about how electricity infrastructure will be built alongside, for example, hydrogen, and where the co-location happens, and how do we make sure that there is enough kind of whole energy system planning happening. There is also a question around how we use scenarios and how we streamline processes. I don't know if you picked that up, but in the UK, there was 2 days ago a decision around reviewing connections and kind of how do you approach dealing with queues in connection for renewable sources, so that all projects which are most ready to connect go kind of first, and then we make sure that we don't slow down the rollout of renewables. So that's one element that also is in this space. And finally, on the investment, we talked about investment. I think the report from the International Energy Agency had 600 billion global investment per year necessary in grids. In the EU, we have 580 billion until 2030. And 70% of that is in distribution, and 30% of it is specifically for digitalization. So I think we do really need to step up what we do around digital grids, making sure we roll out those. And so 3 points around where I see key opportunities. The first one is around grid modernization. So rolling out the smart grid indicators, for example, that have been under development for such a long time is one thing we could do fairly quickly. There is also perhaps we can do more around encouraging networks to develop digitalization plans so they can take on board resources faster with existing infrastructure. And I think there is a strong theme coming through, which is about, we have done a lot of different experiments across Europe, and we have a lot of expertise. But there is, I feel, a need to pull that expertise together and make sure that we are sharing best practices most effectively. For example, from Western to Central and Eastern Europe, making sure that we have the right infrastructure to actually share and speed development, so we don't have to do it 27 times over again. I mean, we do, but we can save some time by sharing what we've learned along the way. And so, yeah, I think there is also an interesting, perhaps, idea around inspiring member states and making sure that we invest in innovation. So we have done innovation missions before, like, for example, the climate neutral cities initiative. I wonder whether we need something similar kind of for grids. They're basically proving we can run grids close to fully electrified by 2030 in different places, picking up some of those best practices and sharing lessons again across countries. And finally, that was mentioned already by a few speakers, but I think we need to make sure that no one's left behind in this. There was talk around financial instruments. We need to make sure that they're accessible to across regions. And I know that the European Investment Bank also has the advisory services, which support some of those projects, but I still think there are distribution network companies and parts of the EU which are not getting access. So we need to be thinking about this and how do we facilitate member state cooperation even more. So I think we have a lot of infrastructure and kind of governance infrastructure which we can use, but my main message, I suppose, is we should definitely speed up the sharing of lessons and learning processes and invest more in that, and invest in sharing best practices, including, for example, on how to include people in decision making. So stop here and looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Vilislava. And I think indeed something that we have maybe not yet discussed concretely is really the European dimension of it all, and the lessons we can share with each other. As many member states are, of course, these are shared problems. So we should really also look for a joint approach. So yeah, maybe before we open the floor for questions, maybe I would first give the speakers a chance to react to anything you've already heard. If anyone, or then maybe give the floor to any participants for any questions you might have on and also online. Yes.
I hope it works a bit that the online participants can hear me. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for a very interesting discussion thus far. My name is Stefan Schipka. I'm from the European Policy Center, and I had two specific questions. Isidoro, Tapia mentioned you mentioned one of the challenges is also the interest rates, and I was wondering if you could maybe say something more. Thank you. If you can maybe tell us a bit more about what more could be done to help reduce the interest rates in this case, and especially what the EIB is doing. And I understand that you already mentioned a number of measures that you're going to support the transformation in the electricity grid system. But if you have something which is, let's say, something more that is tailored or can help, is particular to address the challenge of the interest rates, what the EIB is doing, and if you have any other suggestions for the way forward on this. The second question, maybe I can, that can be specifically for Louise, but also happy for other speakers to come in on this, and the previous question, of course, is on the digitalization. If you have any particular reflections on the role of the artificial intelligence for better optimization and better energy management in the grids, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I take the first one on interest rates. I think it is important to say that there are actually not one challenge, but two challenges that are related. One is the higher interest rates, and the second one is the high inflation in cost, and in particular for the grids projects, both factors are playing against the development of new projects. I mean, it's more costly to finance large infrastructure projects with very intense capital needs upfront. It is more costly to finance any project because of the higher cost of the components of the construction works, etc. And this is indeed a very challenging environment, not only for the grid sectors, as I said, but also for other energy transition sectors. So, I mean, both factors actually are also affecting solar wind industry, and we are seeing this in practice. With the additional maybe element that there has been a very sudden change in the environment. So only 1 or 2 years ago, we were in a context with very low interest rates and very stable inflation cost. And this creates indeed some challenges and some questions that I think all here in this table are concerned about. What are we doing at the IB? We and maybe this is also important to say, we have a statutory restriction. We cannot provide subsidized interest rates. We need to provide interest rates which are given at market conditions. Having said that, we can provide competitive interest rates because our own funding is competitive, because we have a AAA rating and we have access to sources of funding that other financial institutions might not have access to. And because of this, we are able to provide very competitive interest rate for very large tickets for large infrastructure projects. And we have, and I think everyone at the bank is conscious of this counter-cyclical role to play when the market conditions deteriorate, as they have done in the past couple of years. I have shown the figures. We are stepping up our support to the energy sector as a whole. I mentioned the REPowerEU contribution. We will provide 45 billion of additional financing to energy projects until 2027, and we are already given record high financing to electricity grid projects in the past few years, and we are planning to keep doing so in the coming years with the support of REPowerEU. I mean, we're conscious of the difficulties that some of our clients are having to access to third-party financing at a competitive interest rate, and we're conscious that we are in a position to counter balance the effect that this can have in the European industry and in the European development of electricity grids.
On another topic, so AI. Yes, AI, I know that the most advanced distribution system operators are using AI. I have two examples in mind. One, for instance, is to optimize weather forecasts, which is extremely important to balance the grid, to anticipate notably, for instance, the weather events, and therefore to better balance the grid. Another also example, I know that, for instance, in the Nordic countries, if I'm not mistaken, in Sweden, they are using it to make some remote control, and notably for substation. They don't have any employee there. They are using AI to control and to operate, to oversee what's going on the substations. So it's a way somehow to help with the shortage of workforce without completely, replacing human being. But I think it's at least a very helpful tool for a DSO. But maybe, I don't know, at TSO level, maybe you...
Yes, we have experienced the AI tools for different use case, and especially I can illustrate it through 3 examples. First is, as I said, we have a problem about human resources, and for example, planification studies are more and more complicated because 10 years or 15 years ago, we used to when we study a specific case of grid development, we used to have 2-3 scenarios. Now we need to explore much more different situations. So it's a lot of data, and so we use AI tools to help the planification tools to analyze us and to be more focused on the main result and not to be lost in all those data. We also try to develop new tools, but it's more in a very advanced way to help the planification teams to make very fast context studies. As you said, we have a problem about acceptance, and so we used to have some environmental context studies, but it's a lot of time to be done because we have some cabinets we are able to do that. And so what we try to do now is to use AI tools. We'll use all the documents that are available on the web and then whatever, and just to see what are the information that we can collect, and just to identify that, for example, if I have a project to develop from a point A to B, this area, it's not a good idea to imagine in this area, because 5 years ago there was another project, not in the electricity, but for example for water, for whatever, and there are strong opposition. So we know that if we go there, it will be difficult. So we try to use AI to accelerate this process of context analysis. On another side, we developed this to help on the operational side, the people to face more complicated situation. Is what you said about balancing the grid. It's more difficult with the renewables, and then so we need those tools. And the last will be also potentially something that will be very helpful to develop flexibility, because what we do know now that to be able to balance the grid at the local level and at the member state or European level, we will need to develop those flexibility and probably to have embedded higher tools that be able to control some of the electricity usage, for example, at the house level, will perhaps help to develop those flexibility resources. But any case, as I try to illustrate, we'll need to consume more energy to generate more energy. And so we need some physical infrastructure to consume it. And IA won't help in that. So it can help to improve security of supply and to be more resilient. But it won't be a solution, in fact, to integrate more renewable, because at the very end, you need to have some lines, some cables, some physical infrastructures.
Can I just build on, Olivier, you mentioned the role of scenarios, so I can't help resist just also the fact that scenarios are a tool for future planning, right? So we have the planning processes, and then we do different scenarios, and you mentioned the fact that the energy landscape is shifting so quickly. We have the European level planning processes, we have the national level planning processes. So it's also an interesting question on how to take into account the role of flexibility and distribution level pressures more vividly also in the scenario frameworks, what in terms of the assumptions that we kind of hope to see. And just as an example, I think at the European level, there's also some work to do here. The European level 10-year network development planning process essentially looks still at electricity and gas separately, and the distributed energy is one of the deviation scenarios. It's not even the national sort of mainstream national trend scenario. So this means that the scenarios that we have also need to be revisited and updated as the world around is changing. So I think that's a really interesting point to you, Olivier.
Thank you. I don't know if you still want to comment, Vilislava, on the question of AI or okay.
Oh, thank you. My name is Katarina Mask, and I work for Teneo as a senior advisor. I have a simple question, and that is really coming down to who is going to pay, because we heard now about the need for investments that needs to go up quite drastically. You, Isidoro, Tapia, you're opening your purse, and the EU is opening their purse, but we also hear now, I think it was just yesterday, that one of the national TSOs said that they're going to dramatically increase the transmission fees for households, consumers. And I can think that that is not coming down very positive, especially in these times for citizens, for voters, etc. So they might build up some political pressures here as well. And then maybe also a quick bit as well, because of course we're totally redesigning our whole energy system, and that's a huge challenge. But we're also seeing, some of those ideas around energy storage. You mentioned it, a couple of you. And we've seen that both in the US investments in China and India as part of their energy packages. So have energy storage as part of kind of how they see their future systems. And how would we see that? And to some degree, and I think it was you, Olivier, who also mentioned, and some of you others, in the future, we will have more and more batteries in our houses. So, and with kind of, what is it called now? I need to look at the specific term, bi-directional charging of our EVs. I mean, those are already being launched and not really big out on the market. How will that change, and how will that maybe increase the pressure on the grids as well, but also being a solution for that flexibility that we're talking about and the bond management? Thank you.
I don't know who wants to go in first.
And try to answer to the tricky first question about who will pay. I think the one who will pay will be the one that will benefit the most, meaning the consumer, because at the end, if you build, you upgrade the grid, you expand it, it's for the benefit of the customers. It's because we want to electrify and use services. So I think, of course, this will have a cost. We will quite likely and very likely see an increase of the tariff, but on the other hand, I think we need to look at more longer-term perspective, because after we will go for a system with more renewables, we should see also a drop in terms of price for the production, the cost for the production. We should also have a system which is more digitalized, so more efficiently managed. So I think on the long-term run, we should actually benefit from that. So yeah, that will for sure be a big sort of peak for this investment, but it's for the benefit of the society and customers.
Yes, it's a complicated equation, but a very important part of this energy sector transformation is a shift from fossil energy to clean energy. So yes, electricity will cost more, but in fact, the bill for fossil energy should reduce. So it's an issue about what is the balance, and probably there are some economical models also to imagine just to smooth and to avoid a peak or ramp. So we have to consider not only the energy cost, electricity cost, but the full energy. And one of the issue is energy efficiency, and also what I call energy temperance. How we learn to use less energy, not through the performance of the devices, but through our own behavior, because we have to say that the energy was not enough costly, and we have very bad habit in the usage of energy. And so it's a combination of all that could make it acceptable to the people. And I think it's very important to give this political signal. The tomorrow world won't be the same. And so it's very important also that everybody take its share. And so if we do not change our relationship to energy, it will be quite difficult, according to me. And regarding the storage facilities, it's clearly a part of what I call the development of flexibility resources. And as you said, it's okay, we will have a lot of battery in the house and in the cars and so on, and so we can use bidirectional. it's not so easy. And the first and the very easy way to use that is just a smart charging. It's not for bilateral, because when you want to organize bilateral, it's more costly because you need more equipment for the transformation. Beside what we prove through studies we published now 5 years ago is what is most important. It's what we call smart chargings to avoid to load the car during the peak demand periods. And so to imagine a vehicle to grid for all domestic people, so it's quite difficult to manage. It will be in the first time probably for some homogeneous vehicle fleet that it could be easy to find the right economic model.
Maybe just to add on that question, there is the issue of costs and then value, and certainly from a social perspective, people are probably more willing to invest and accept costs if they very transparently see what the value of that will be. And I think that also speaks to the issue of being very transparent of who is paying for what. Are we all paying and financing the transition? Or are there some intransparencies there? Are we benefiting equally, and are we in this together? So that's where potentially issues can arise if people feel like it's not something that we are all doing. But so really seeing the value is super important.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions?
Thank you. Pierre Knudsen from the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise. Just a comment to Olivier's answer here to my Swedish colleague. We have politicians who have worked very hard last year or two to try and mask the price signal. So how on earth are we going to get there? How on earth are we going to get the customers to come on board in this transition if they're not having any price signals? They will charge their cars midday because it doesn't matter, because the politicians are trying not to give them a bill. Thank you. So how to solve that?
It's a quite difficult issue, and so I think that we should have some debate, and there were a lot of discussion about this market design reform, and so we know that now there are a lot of political issues about the energy, but we will need some price signal to change the behavior. But at the same time, we need also to have the right tools to protect the people that do not have the means to pay more. And so it's a part of the European regulation that is very important also. I can just give an example about the electricity price. If I take my own experience, I have an electrical car. So I pay half the price I used to pay when I had the petrol. So for me, it's acceptable to have an increase by 20 or 30% of my electricity bill because it's less costly than petrol. But it's because I can buy the electrical car. It's not the case for everybody. So it's why we need to segment the population. And there are some people that have to be protected and helped just to be able to take part in this transition, and there are a share of the population that can take their share and pay the new services in order to have this energy transition. And according to me, I think that politicals could take such a talk. But it's quite difficult when you have election period and you have somewhere in Europe or where you have election. Perhaps it would be better if you have a single schedule and calendar in Europe with all the elections at the same time. So perhaps we can have 5 years to be quiet and just to be the job, but it's not possible at that stage.
Thank you. Yes, maybe final question for concluding remarks. So we've talked about public support and acceptability of the clean energy transition and grid development, but something we haven't yet really discussed is how we can balance the need for faster permitting with EU environmental objectives such as nature and biodiversity protection, and also what are the risks that we should be mindful of here, especially in light of for instance, the overriding public interest introduced by the revised Renewable Energy Directive for renewable projects and their connection to grids. And also happy to hear from Isidoro what conditionality the EIB is using for aligning its lending policy with environmental objectives of the EU.
It is indeed a very pertinent question. We have discussed how loan permitting and planning is one of the challenges that typically electricity grids development face in practice. There are, of course, other interest that has to be and public goods that have to be protected. I mean, social acceptance is one of them, biodiversity and nature. So it is indeed the case that here, and this is a policy decision, a right balance needs to be achieved. No, we need to strike the right balance between both goods. At the IB here, we have strict environmental and social guidelines. We follow the EU legislation in this regard. So we follow with close attention any development that might happen on this aspect, but we cannot move ahead, of course, of the legislation. So it's a decision that has to be taken at a political level, I would say, to strike the right balance between both dimensions. But it is important to, I mean, we have seen the data on how long it takes to build a new distribution or a new transmission line. It is indeed becoming a bottleneck for the energy transition. So I would say that something has to be done.
Anyone else? Any further comments on this issue of or balancing faster permitting with EU environmental objectives?
Very briefly, I think it's a matter of now we need to give some responsibility to the local authority and also national authority, but at distribution grid even more local authority to really make a proper communication about the benefits of, for instance, building new grids and making sure that we understand at the end why we're shifting towards an energy transition where we will need, of course, to do some work and also to add new lines, new cables in the landscape. I think it's really about communication campaign, and I think it's the job of the authorities, especially local authorities, to help convincing and creating this public acceptance.
And if I can build on that, communication and early consultation for sure. Also data information sharing. So we're looking at issues such as good quality environmental sensitivity analysis, due obligations to map for biodiversity, wildlife sensitivity, migratory routes, if we're talking about transmission issues, especially do not harm high biodiversity areas. Or there's also discussion on nature positive infrastructures. Of course, that has to be substantiated. What does that actually mean? But innovative practice, not only socially, but also environmentally. So I think it requires a lot of thinking around this, and where the strong sustainability and environmental policy safeguards drive the planning and are integrated.
As it has been said, so I think that transparency, it's very important to build trust between society and all the companies. And also, I think that in the market design reform, there is something that is very important, is the wish to develop the energy community. I think that part of the people should be part of the game, and because energy is a very complex issue. And so we need that some of the people to be able to understand more that game. And if we keep a place for the energy community to develop, I think it can help, but it could be another topic for another roundtable.
Thank you. Vilislava, I don't know if you still want to comment on
yes,
this.
I just wanted to build on that, on Louise's point as well. There is also an element, and also Joni's, there is also an element of how you engage as well. And there are so many examples of which local authorities have come up with creative ways of including people in decision making and using new tools. And to the point of digitalization, you can also be a bit more interactive in the way you engage communities. And the other point I wanted to make, again, was this around good practices. We know how to build infrastructure, and so we've gathered a lot of lessons around how to engage, how not to engage, perhaps. And so I think there are lessons we can share there around how to include and making sure we balance the environmental concerns as well as the speed which we need to build.
Thanks. Well, as I see that we only have 5 minutes left, I will maybe ask every speaker to briefly, in 1 minute, give any concluding reflections or remarks and any recommendations for the European Commission and the upcoming action plan on grids. Maybe Isidoro first.
As I said, we are policy takers, so here we follow the Commission's guidance. But I would say again that at the IB we have a counter-cyclical role to play, and we are very much aware of the financial conditions, the increasing interest rates in the market. So we are willing to increase our support to this sector, to the electricity grid sector. This is what we have been doing in the past few years, and this is what we're planning to do going forward.
As a topic was the grid, so I can assure that all the TSO are fully committed to succeed, but it won't be able. We won't be able to do that alone, and so it's a collective duty. And if I consider the European level, we have a lot of regulation, we have a lot of tools, and now it's not time for thinking and designing new, but using the one that we have in a very efficient way. And sometimes it's one of the difficulties, in fact, to be more reactive and just it's time to do.
I fully agree. I think it's called action plan, so it's time to now go to implementations, to be concrete, to provide a concrete roadmap for the power industry, and especially to see how exactly we can enable this power grid. And I think I would really like the European Commission to provide a roadmap for the coming years with regards what needs to be transposed, what needs to be implemented, where there are some guidelines that are required, and maybe why not some new legislation to fill some gaps. So this is a bit my expectation from this plan.
I already said earlier a couple of points, but maybe in summary, the action plan pointing to the role of actual actors, where is capacity needed to be built, this shift in perspective more to the distribution level, what does it actually entail, and which actors are not doing the things we assume them to do, with strong social and environmental safeguards.
And on my side, just to echo the point that the action plan, I think, should be both about new infrastructure and how do we use our existing infrastructure more. So making sure there is actions which relate to distribution networks being smarter and using better capacity. And the other point is, as I mentioned, just if we need new ways to share best practice, let's see them in the action plan and encourage them, because I think there is a lot of knowledge which exists in industry and regulators in communities, in community groups, which just needs to be shared if we want to be faster.
Thank you. I think that brings an end to our discussion. Of course, we have already unpacked a lot, but we could still unpack a lot more, such as like the skills debate, which we haven't really discussed, and other topics. But I want to thank all of the speakers for their valuable contributions today, and of course also the participants in the room and the ones joining online for their questions during the Q&A. And the European Investment Bank for their support for this event. And at EPC, we plan to continue to follow closely this topic, and we hope to see you again at any of our future events on this topic. Thank you very much, and bye.